Thank you very much for joining our Ed.M financial aid information session today. My name is Arnal Furji and I'm the Associate Director of Admissions. And this presentation will be led by my colleague, Sean Bennett, who I'll let him introduce himself. And with that, I'll hand it over to Sean.
All right. Hi, everybody out there. This is Sean. I'm the Associate Director for Financial Aid here at HGSE. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of our financial aid program, information about how to apply for financial aid, and timelines for the process so you're prepared. Although this presentation focuses on the Ed.M financial aid program, I'll also briefly discuss the PhD and the EDLD financial aid programs. So those of you who are interested in the PhD or EDLD programs, you'll have some basic information about those as well. So admissions and financial aid are separate processes at HGSE, but applying for admission is the first step towards activating your financial aid record. So once you've applied for admission, the financial aid office will contact you in January with instructions on how to apply for financial aid. So we have an online financial aid application and an online financial aid system, and we'll send you instructions about how to access that system. If you're admitted to HGSE, the financial aid office will process your aid application and provide you with a financial aid package in late March to early April. At that time, you'll be able to view your aid package on our HGSE student aid portal and compare offers from other schools in order to make your enrollment decision. So here are the aid application components and deadlines. So the first piece is the HGSE financial aid application, which is required for all Ed.M applicants and is due by February 7th, 2020. Again, that's going to be completed on the HGSE financial aid portal, and we'll send you instructions on how to access that after you've applied for admission in mid-January or thereabouts. U.S. citizens and permanent residents also must complete the 2020-2021 FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid. That is due by February 21st, 2020, and you have to make sure that you use HGSE's school code, which is E00213. If you add that to your FAFSA, that'll ensure that we receive the data that you complete on the FAFSA. And you want to be especially careful to use that school code because there are many different schools at Harvard and there are different schools codes for each school. So the way that we get your data is by using the correct school code. Also, if there's any supporting documentation requested by our office or required for the FAFSA, you want to provide that as soon as possible. You want to note and remember that you'll want to promptly reply to any requests from our office regarding additional requirements or other requests, and note that only complete applications are processed. Applications are processed in the order that they become complete. Late applications are accepted but are subject to funding availability. So please do try to meet these deadlines. It's very important. I kind of can't stress that enough that applicants who meet our stated deadlines are given priority for funding. So now I'll talk a little bit about the types of aid available, and keep in mind that these are the main types of aid available. It's a high-level overview. These are the types of aid available to Ed.M applicants. So there's a few different types for Ed.M students. The first is merit-based scholarships and grants. These types of aid are determined by the strength of your admissions application and are not related to your financial aid application. You may be presented with opportunities to complete short merit-based scholarship applications as part of your application for admission, and various admissions committees consider your eligibility for merit-based scholarships and grants. These awards can vary in amounts from a few $1,000s to full tuition and fee scholarships, but since they're merit-based, they're highly competitive. So there's a really stiff competition for these types of awards. And on this slide, you'll see a few examples of merit-based scholarships and grants. The Urban Scholars Award is intended for applicants who have a strong connection to urban education environments and that happens to be a full tuition and fee scholarship. The Zantz Early Childhood Fellowship, just as it sounds, is intended for students who have experience in or interest in early childhood education. That's about a half tuition scholarship. Currently for this year, it's $25,000 for the year. Likewise, the Leadership in Education Award is a $25,000 award that's about half tuition. And that's intended for students that have experience in leadership roles in education. So those are a few examples of merit-based scholarships. Those scholarships, again, are determined by the strength of your application for admission, and they're determined by blind committees, and then you're notified if you're chosen for one of those scholarships as part of the admissions process. The second type of aid available is aid that's determined through your financial aid application, and that's need-based scholarships and grants. So these types of aid are mainly determined by the data submitted on your HGSE financial aid application. It takes a wide variety of financial factors into consideration, but HGSE need-based grant program is modest. So in most cases, it won't meet your full need, and many students do not receive grant support. Many applicants believe that all students admitted to HGSE are fully supported, and this is not the case. Almost all students must plan on a significant financial investment to fund an academic program at HGSE. And this probably isn't the first time that I'll mention that, because it's just something that we want to make sure that you understand. The third type of aid available are other scholarships at Harvard. The main ones being what we call restricted scholarships that are offered by the Committee on General Scholarships. Restricted scholarships are those types of scholarships that are intended for students that meet particular conditions. Those scholarships are listed on the HGSE financial aid application. So there's a variety of different scholarships available. You'll be able to review those when you submit your HGSE financial aid application and self-identify if you're a match for any of those. Then there's a nominating process. And all of those types of scholarships are Harvard-wide scholarships. So again, competitive scholarships where you're competing from all newly admitted and current students from across the university at all schools. Last are federal work study and student loans, and those are sources of aid that are available mainly to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. Supplemental loans are also available to both U.S. citizens and international students, which can help meet the gap between the financial aid package that is offered to you and the estimated cost of your academic year at HGSE. Many HGSE students are also successful in finding external scholarships to bring in and help meet your student expenses. We recommend thinking about your personal and professional networks when identifying potential sources of external scholarships. So don't cast too wide a net with that. Think a little bit more close to you and close to home, if you will, in identifying potential sources of external scholarships. So here I'll talk really quickly about the PhD aid program and the EDLD aid program. So for PhD students, all PhD and education students receive a multi-year funding package that includes tuition, health insurance fees, and a stipend for the first 2 years of the program. By the way, it's a 5-year program. Tuition, health insurance fees, and a combination of teaching fellowships and research assistantships are offered in the 3rd and 4th years. And a summer research stipend is offered for the summers after years 1 through 4. Tuition and health insurance fees are also offered for the 5th year. During the dissertation completion year in the PhD program, students also receive a fellowship covering tuition, health insurance fees, and a stipend to help with living expenses. Applicants are also encouraged to apply for external grants and fellowships whenever possible. And the Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences administers that aid program, and admitted students work with their office to receive the support. So PhD students actually work with a different Harvard school outside of HGSE for their PhD financial aid package. And no formal financial aid application is required for the PhD funding program because all admitted PhD students receive that same funding program, which is basically a fully funded program for the 5 years. Moving on to EDLD students, all EDLD students receive a multi-year funding package for the 3-year program. That funding package includes funding for all tuition and health insurance fees for all 3 years. Students also receive a first-year stipend of about $27,800 for the 9-month academic year, and then comparable support via a combination of stipend, teaching fellowships, and or research assistantships in year 2. Then in year 3, students engage in a 10-month paid residency with compensation of about $65,000. So it's just like earning a salary in year 3. No financial aid application is required to receive EDLD support. Just like the PhD program, admitted EDLD students automatically receive that funding program. So that's the PhD and EDLD funding programs in a nutshell. They're very straightforward because all admitted students receive the same funding program that runs through the entirety of their academic program. So this slide we do have a lot of international students here today. So this slide lists some additional opportunities specifically for international applicants. You may learn more about these opportunities on the Harvard Committee on General Scholarships website at scholarships.harvard.edu. These scholarships are usually limited, competitive, and often require a separate application process. So if you're from any of these nations, you should research potential scholarship opportunities on that website and learn more about the application process for specific scholarships. A note about international students is that international students have to go through a process of certifying an academic visa to come study in the United States at HGSE or any other school. Here at HGSE, international students will be responsible for certifying more than $82,000 in guaranteed funds in order to receive a student visa for a program at HGSE. So most international students must rely on a combination of personal financial resources, funding from their home nation, such as scholarships and sponsorships, and HGSE financial aid to help meet that certification requirement. Admitted international students will work with the HGSE admissions office to certify visas in the spring of 2020. Up next is a basic timeline of what to expect through the financial aid process. So again, accepted students with complete aid applications are notified of their aid packages at the end of March to early April. And then April becomes a very busy month because you have to compare aid offers from all the schools you've applied to and then make an enrollment decision. You also have to accept your aid package with HGSE. But don't worry, changes to your aid packages can be made after you've accepted them, and no aid is actually processed until the start of the academic year in fall. So it's a common question, what if I receive an external scholarship or I change my mind about a loan or something along those lines? We have plenty of time after you've accepted your aid package to help you make adjustments if you see fit. You should be planning and solidifying your budget, your academic year budget during this time in April and May, which includes identifying your personal external financial resources and identifying potential funding shortages that may need to be met with supplemental student loans or other resources. You'll apply for supplemental student loans in June or July and prepare the fall term during that time, which also includes paying your fall term student bill. So Harvard will bill you on a term basis. So you receive one bill for the fall term, usually in July with a due date of August. And then you'll receive a second bill for the spring term in December with a due date in January. So each term is billed separately. But you do have to have a plan, a financial plan for the full academic year. We'll notify you when it's time to complete additional aid requirements for things like federal student loans in the summer months, usually June, July, and August. And then in August and September, you'll be transitioning to HGSE and starting your program. Financial aid doesn't become available until after the first week of classes. So you need to be prepared to arrive on campus with money saved for the start of the academic year. And by that, I mean you'll need money for living expenses and startup costs. If you're receiving financial aid, that money will be applied to your student bill automatically as an anticipated aid credit. So it deducts from the amount that's due on your bill. And when you start seeing your bill, it'll all make a lot more sense when that happens. But if you're relying on financial aid to help with living expenses and things of that nature, that money won't be available until after classes begin in the fall. So you do have to have some resources available to help get you to that point. So next, it's important to know that while we make every attempt to help students meet a portion of their expenses, there are a lot of factors that limit our ability to do so. Some of those factors are institutional factors, such as the limited financial aid resources that we have available to share with eligible financial aid applicants. One note is that when people hear about the large endowment of Harvard University, what they often don't know is that figure is the aggregate of all of the individual school endowments. As a graduate school of education, our endowment is much smaller than many of our peers at Harvard, and this impacts the amount of financial aid that's offered to our applicants. One of the most common misperceptions at HGSE is that if you're accepted, you receive all the financial resources you need, but this is simply not the case for almost all of our aid applicants. So I'm only saying that to give you an honest assessment, to dispel a myth, and to better prepare you financially for what lies ahead if you're accepted and you need to consider finances as a condition of accepting and attending HGSE. Many of our financial aid limitations are also regulatory. Some of our common regulatory limits are listed on this slide. You'll be set up on a 9-month academic year and student budget. That student budget can't meet expenses for things like family support if you happen to have a spouse or dependents, consumer debt like credit card payments or car payments or mortgages, things like that. We can't meet expenses for moving expenses if you're coming here from another nation or a different part of the country, or summer rent. There are a lot of other conditions, but you kind of catch on to what I mean. Essentially, financial aid can really only cover direct educational expenses during the academic year. So that's things like tuition and fees, which are directly billed to you, but you also do get allowances for living expenses. So things like rent and utilities, personal expenses, food, supplies and books, things of that nature, local transportation. You can look on our website, on the financial aid website, and actually see the current breakdown of a student budget. And I encourage everyone to do that to learn more about how that is parsed. Financial aid is kind of one of those things where with these limitations, it can make it a little difficult for people. But again, early planning is really helpful. And remember, we don't always like to hear this, but it's important to mention that you do bear the main responsibility for financing your education. We'll partner with you to help identify strategies and resources and try to provide you with as much as we can. But that, again, is a reality to be prepared for. And it's always important to remember that attending any graduate program is truly an individual discretionary decision. So just keep that in mind when you're going through this process. So I've alluded to this many times already, but early financial planning is essential, and I can't overemphasize the importance of that. You should have a financial plan along with an academic and professional plan when considering graduate study. Since most merit and need-based aid packages do not meet the full expense of an HGSE program, especially in a high cost of living area such as Cambridge, you need to be financially prepared. You can start by identifying the personal resources you may have available to pay towards your education and by researching our expected cost of attendance on our website. I'll talk about the cost of attendance in a minute because we got a question there, and that's a great question to answer. We, along with our that cost of attendance information on our website, we also post our most recent financing guide, budget calculators, and other tools to help with your planning. Early financial planning and reviewing that information on our website will help make the financial aid and enrollment process much less stressful for you. We want you to attend a graduate program at a time when you can make the most beneficial academic, professional, and financial decision possible. HGSE program is a significant investment, and understanding that investment is very important. On the next slide, you'll see some resources and contacts. So if you go to that website, it might be a little obscured on this slide, but our website is gsc.harvard.edu/financial aid. So there you'll find the budget breakdown for students for the 9-month academic year, including the current tuition and fees. That will be updated in early spring, usually around March or so. So it's pretty accurate. If you add maybe to be safe, 3% to that figure, that'll cover any changes that we usually experience from year to year. And that'll also give you a solid start on your planning to try to determine, okay, how much over the 9-month academic year can I maybe expect, or should I budget for living expenses and personal expenses? When you look at that budget breakdown, you'll see fixed expenses like tuition and fees. Those are going to be the same for all full-time students, for example. But there are also flexible expense categories like living expenses. Not everyone will pay the same amount in rent, for example. But the important part is to use those figures as a guideline so that your actual expenses fall within the budget. Otherwise, financial aid can't help with that. If you're looking at supplemental loans, for example, to help with living expenses, then you need to be sure that those expenses fit within this total student budget so that you have the resources to meet those expenses. There is some flexibility within that. In those budget categories, you can move some money from one place to the other, but the basic rule of thumb and one of the limitations of financial aid is that your total financial aid from all sources can't exceed the student budget. So that's why it's important to look at the student budget, understand it, and try to make sure that your actual personal expenses are going to fit within that so that financial aid can help meet all of those expenses. So hopefully that helps and makes sense, but we're always available to help answer questions. If you're going through the process and you're admitted to HGSE, you'll have a lot more opportunities to connect with us and ask more specific questions about your aid package and the student budget. We just like to get this information out ahead of you, as quickly as possible so that you can get a start on planning. So I ran through some of that kind of quickly, but it's a pretty high level overview. A lot more detailed information about specific aid programs, from scholarships and grants to student loans, work study opportunities, things of that nature are on our website. We can open this up to some questions, and Arnaldo and I are going to kind of work back and forth to pick some questions up from the chat. Just be sure if you're asking questions not to get too personal. We don't want you to disclose too much personal information in this forum. If you have really specific questions, we encourage you to contact our office at the contact information here on this slide. And we'll take a couple of minutes to kind of look through this and pick some questions out when we go through them.
So while people are thinking of their questions and typing things in, I sent this information via the chat inbox, but if you're viewing this recording in the future, you won't see the questions in the chat box. So I just want to make a quick announcement here. There's this one website where we have recorded pretty much all of the virtual information sessions, such as this one, for example, and we post them on our website. So you can view this on demand at a future date, and you'll also see everything, all the other topics we've covered in the past. And the website is gse.harvard.edu/admissions/recorded-webinars. So I'll repeat that one more time. gse.harvard.edu/admissions/recorded-webinars. So I encourage you to visit that page in the future to refer back to this session or listen to any other topics we've covered in depth.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in before we lose this question because I did want to mention this. Someone asked if they can apply to both the PhD and the EDM at the same time. So Arnold might chime in on this, but when you apply for admission to either the PhD or the EDLD program, you are presented with an option to be referred to an EDM program if you're not offered admission to the PhD or EDLD program. So it's important to note that if you are selecting that option, that you should follow the instructions to apply for EDM financial aid, because the PhD and EDLD financial aid programs are guaranteed. So if you're admitted, you receive those programs automatically. But if you are indicating that you'd like to be referred to an EDM program, you should also complete the aid application process for the EDM program. And we will invite you to do that because we'll be notified of those students who indicated they'd like to be referred to one of the programs, and we'll likewise reach out with instruction on how to apply for EDM financial aid. So thanks for that question. That was a good reminder. So there's another question, and this is a good question for students with families, from Constance, who asks, for applicants who currently have children in college, does HGSE and the FAFSA take the entire family's tuition costs into consideration when determining need? The answer is yes. So when you complete the FAFSA, it does ask for that type of information. And then through the calculations and the various algorithms that are utilized, that is taken into account. It's always kind of difficult financially, to be honest, for students with families, particularly if they have kids in college, because there's only so many resources to go around. We do consider that information and then make our awards accordingly. So I would say that it is a particular challenge for students who have families, whether they have dependents in college or not, or simply spouses. Most of the time, financial aid ends up being determined based on the individual student. So a lot of those family expenses that are being experienced in the real world, they are taken into consideration, but it usually doesn't meet kind of the full need of the full family. So I hope that kind of helps to clarify that. We were asked, what is iGrad? iGrad is a financial planning tool, so anyone can use that, whether you're an HGSE student or not. So that's a third-party suite of financial planning, budgeting tools. So we encourage people to take a look at that if they're interested. So another question, I think this is from Daniel, is that there are student loans provided by the Harvard Credit Union. Those are what we call supplemental student loans. So what happens is you're first presented with a financial aid package from HGSE, and oftentimes there's going to be a gap between the amount of aid that we offer and the expected cost of attending the program. So many people will meet that difference through a combination of personal resources, external scholarships if they're bringing those in with them, and supplemental student loans. So the Harvard Credit Union does offer a supplemental student loan, which is currently at a maximum of $16,000 that can help meet that gap. There are also federal supplemental student loans that can help meet that gap. That's available to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. And then banks and other lending institutions also offer private supplemental student loans. So conceivably, a person could finance the full cost of the program. Supplemental student loans, however, are credit-based. So you do need to have good credit in order to be approved for certain supplemental student loans. supplemental student loan credit requirements can vary from loan to loan. Some are very cursory and easy to receive, like the federal direct graduate plus loan that has some very basic credit criteria, but other lenders may have more strict criteria. So it's kind of an open process that you undertake usually in June and July when you apply for that. And then we help get that in place in your financial aid package.
And there's a question from Christian who's asking whether it's possible for a spouse to work with the visa sponsored by HGSC for the PhD and master's program. So that it really depends on what visa you're coming in under. And so I highly recommend that you go to the Harvard International Office's website, who will then discuss sort of the difference of between the different visa types and actually what it takes to qualify for a particular visa type. We also cover that a little bit on the international virtual that we did before, and that's on the website where I made the announcement earlier as well, where our recorded webinars are located.
Let's see. Let's pick up on William's question about federal student loans for graduate school subject to the 10-year public service student loan forgiveness. This is a really difficult question to ask or to answer right now. The answer is yes, but there have been a lot of reports. Right now, we're in a very politically unpredictable space in the United States, and the public service loan forgiveness program is caught up in that. So while the public service loan forgiveness program does exist, we do not recommend that students make an enrollment decision or borrow a student loan based on the expectation that it will be forgiven through that program. We hope that it continues to exist. We have no indication that it will. And early reports from the first cohorts that have become eligible for that program have not been very positive. So I'm going to leave it at that and encourage anyone who's interested in that type of program to do some research on our website, on the U.S. Department of Education's website, and also read some news articles from reputable news sources about what's happening with that program. So thanks for that question. I would just say beware of changes, and it can be very difficult to predict what will happen with that program into the future. There's a question about a general EFC range from the FAFSA that qualifies students for need-based aid. And the answer to that is no. So there are a lot of different factors that we take into account when considering students' eligibility for HGSC need-based grant. So financial data from the FAFSA is one of those factors. We take into factors demographic information like your age, family size, where in the country you live, things like that. So it's a pretty holistic look. There are also elements that are institutional. So the FAFSA really is just a tool that we utilize to collect that data. For graduate aid, it's very different than undergraduate aid. So, one of the main differences is that you don't have any entitlement aid sources. Like some undergraduate students might be receiving Pell Grants or something along those lines. Those types of things don't exist for graduate students. So we're really using the FAFSA as a method to collect data for our aid application and to sort of bolster that information. Housing conditions, that's not really our area of expertise, but I can say that it varies. Cambridge is very expensive. Boston is very expensive. If you look at the allowances on our website under the tuition and costs page, so it's part of that student budget breakdown that I've mentioned, you'll see an allowance for the academic year for room and board. And if you divide that figure by 9, you'll get an idea of approximately how much per month your actual rent, utilities, and food should fall within. So it's over a couple $1,000s a month. Some people find housing for much cheaper, for much, a less expensive rate. Some are a little bit more expensive. It really kind of moves around quite a bit. So as you get a little bit closer, you'll have more opportunities to learn about housing, and our Office of Student Affairs is a resource to help with housing questions. They're a bit more expert in that area than we are. So final decisions released. Admissions is usually early March, and financial aid follows about 3 to 4 weeks after that. So you usually get your admissions decision in early March, and you'll receive a financial aid decision by late March to early April. There's a question in there about what's the educational cost of a child dependent of a PhD applicant. Again, financial aid, whether you're in the PhD, EDLD, or EDM programs, is based on an individual student alone. So family costs, there really isn't an allowance for that. Keep in mind that financial aid programs are intended for an individual student to attend a program. So it's intended as financial assistance to help you with that. It can't help you meet family costs. So that's just a kind of a harsh reality that we all have to deal with and work within. So I hope that helps out. Retirement. Oh, great. That's a great question, Charles. There's a question about whether retirement accounts are taken into consideration. The answer to that is no. So when you complete a FAFSA and a HGSE financial aid application, there will be questions about your assets, things like savings and checking accounts, investment accounts, things of that nature. But retirement accounts such as 401ks, those are exempted. So you do not need to report your retirement accounts.
And we have a question from Frederick asking about the enrollment deadline. So if you are admitted to HGSC, then students would need to let us know by April 15th if they're going to enroll or not. So that's our decision deadline. And I think that was pretty much for most of the questions, I would say, that relate to financial aid. I think there's one more here. How many students receive the Urban Scholars Fellowship?
Oh, sure. So Urban Scholars, that's a merit scholarship, and that the number of awards varies from year to year. It's highly competitive. It is roughly distributed evenly across programs, so you don't need to apply to a particular program or concentration to be eligible for an Urban Scholars Award. And I would say, it's roughly equally distributed from year to year. But it's important to note that a lot of people have their eye on merit-based scholarships. And if I can be really straightforward and honest, all students who are admitted to HGSC are competitive. They're great academically. When you are admitted, you're also in another competition for those merit-based scholarships, and not everyone receives one. So all told, a fairly small percentage of admitted students receive a merit-based scholarship. I'm not saying that to discourage you from applying, but it's just one of those things. It's important to note that a lot of our admitted students are going into it thinking, I got in, I just know I'm going to get a merit-based scholarship. And then they find out that, that competition is particularly fierce, and a small percentage win those scholarships. So we're trying just to, temper expectations, get you prepared financially so that you can avoid disappointments and have as much advanced information from a financial perspective to be prepared and make a plan and make an enrollment decision. And I'd say that would be true for any graduate program that you're applying to. Usually in late March to early April, after you've gotten all of your admissions decisions to whatever schools and programs you've applied to, you're going to have to go through this secondary decision-making process of comparing those aid offers and thinking, okay, where am I making the best investment for me with my financial goals in mind, my professional goals in mind, academic goals, and so forth.
Great.
All right, so do we have any last minute questions? We've got a little bit more time for them if there are any.
So a question came up earlier regarding the SOLZANs, whether need is also a factor in the evaluation process. And we do say on our website that financial, if you have financial need, that you sort of get a little bit of a priority.
Yeah, with the XANTs, the XANTs is a little bit of a hybrid. The main driver for the XANTs is merit, but there is a need component. So we do encourage everyone who applies for admission to apply for financial aid, because you never know what you might be eligible for unless you apply. The XANTs does have a small need component that's taken into consideration, but it is not the driving factor behind who receives that particular scholarship.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today and for your questions. I'm sure you'll think of other questions as well in the future, but please, by all means, feel free to connect with us. And there is a ton of information on the financial aid website as well, whether it's for U.S. citizens or permanent residents or international students as well. And please do refer back to the website that I shared earlier about the recorded webinars, because we do dive pretty deep on many important topics that students are interested in. And of course, you can always reach out to the admission office as well with any additional questions. So thank you very much and good luck.
Thanks, everybody.